The dusty wind howled through the narrow alleys of the village, carrying the scent of burnt clay and desperation. It was a place where time didn't just stand still, it retreated. Maya adjusted the coarse fabric of her sari, wiping sweat and brick dust from her forehead. She was 28, but her hands told the story of a woman twice her age. Beside her, the kiln fire roared, a relentless beast that demanded constant feeding. Her life was a rhythmic cycle of labor, misery, and the crushing weight of a decision she had made a decade ago. 10 years. A lifetime. Back then, she had been young, impatient, and hungry for a life that didn't smell of poverty. Her husband, Ergen, had been a quiet man. A cobbler, just like his father. He sat under a banyan tree, his hands stained permanently dark by dyes and polish, his eyes always focused on the heels of worn-out sandals. Maya had looked at him and seen a dead end. She craved luxury, city lights, and someone who could offer her more than scraps of leather. She remembered the day she left. She hadn't even looked back. She had walked away with a local trader who promised her a job in the city. Ergen hadn't begged. He had just watched her go, his eyes holding a strange, calm sorrow. She had arrived in the city only to find that the job was a trap, a dark descent into a world where she was just another expendable soul. She had survived by the skin of her teeth, eventually finding honest, back-breaking work, drifting from one tragedy to another, until she finally crawled back to the outskirts of her old village, broken and hollow, finding work at the brick kiln. Move it, Maya. The bricks aren't going to stack themselves. The foreman's voice barked, shattering her reverie. She bent down, her back screaming in protest. Suddenly, the entire atmosphere of the kiln shifted. The air, usually heavy with the sounds of labor, grew unnaturally still. People stopped moving. Whispers rippled through the workers like a breeze through dry grass. A line of polished, black stuffs rolled into the unpaved clearing, kicking up a storm of dust. Doors opened with a synchronized click. Men in crisp, dark suits stepped out, their faces devoid of emotion, scanning the area with professional intensity. A man emerged from the lit vehicle. He was dressed in a pristine white shirt, tailored charcoal trousers, and shoes that shone like mirrors. He was tall, his posture commanding, his presence so immense that it seemed to shrink the kiln, the piles of bricks, and the very ground they stood on. He was the district collector. The man who held the power of the law in his hands. The villagers, including the owner of the kiln, scrambled forward, bowing, their voices a cacophony of sycophantic welcomes. Maya stayed back, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't want to be seen. She was ashamed of her ruined hands, her torn clothes, the way the years had etched exhaustion into her skin. She turned to walk away, to hide behind the stacks of bricks, but a voice stopped her. It wasn't the collector's. It was the wind, or perhaps just the sheer gravity of his gaze. "You there," the collector said. His voice was deep, resonant, and familiar. Maya froze. Her blood turned to ice. She turned slowly, her legs feeling like lead. The collector was walking toward her, ignoring the flustered kiln owner. He walked past the rows of broken men and women, his eyes locked onto hers. As he drew closer, she saw it, the sharp jawing, the way he tilted his head when he was thinking, and those eyes. Those eyes had once looked at her with love. Now, they held the cold, objective stare of a man who looked at the world through the lens of policy and justice. It was Ergen. But it wasn't the Ergen she had abandoned. The cobbler was gone. In his place was a man forged by ambition and an iron will. Ergen, she breathed, the name feeling foreign on her tongue. He stopped inches from her. The silence between them was deafening. The surrounding workers had fallen completely silent, sensing the tectonic shift in the air. "It has been a long time, Maya," he said. His voice was level, devoid of malice, yet it carried an edge that made her shudder. You are the collector," she stammered, gesturing vaguely at his clothes. He looked down at his shoes, polished, perfect, the irony not lost on either of them. "I stopped fixing other people's shoes a long time ago. I decided it was time to fix the roads they walked on." He looked around at the squalid conditions of the kiln, the child labor, the lack of water, the exploitation. Then, he looked back at her. "I'm here to inspect the illegal operations of this kiln. It's a blight on this district." "Ergen, please," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. "I didn't know. I didn't think you left because you wanted a life of dignity," he interrupted, his voice cutting through the dust. "You thought that by leaving me, you were stepping toward that life. Look at where you are, Maya." He signaled to his officers. "Shut it down. Every bit of it. Detain the owner. Ensure every worker here is provided transport to the district headquarters. They will be registered for government aid, and we will find them legitimate work." The scene erupted into chaos. The kiln owner began to protest, but a single look from Urgent silenced him. Urgent turned back to Maya. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't offer a smile. You were always searching for something better, he said quietly. You looked for it in the city. You looked for it in men who had power. You never realized that the only power that matters is the one you build within yourself. He began to walk toward his car. Urgent, wait. She cried out. Did you do all of this, for me? To show me? He stopped and looked back over his shoulder. The sun was setting, casting a long, golden shadow behind him. I didn't do this for you, Maya. I did this because the man I am today doesn't allow such things to exist in his district. The fact that you are here is just a twist of fate. He got into the car. As the vehicle pulled away, followed by the rest of his fleet, Maya stood alone in the clearing. The kiln was silent. The fire was dead. She looked down at her hands. They were still covered in dust, still scarred. But for the first time in 10 years, she wasn't a slave to the cycle. She had been saved by the man she had discarded not out of love, but out of the sheer, terrifying brilliance of his own transformation. She realized then that the tragedy wasn't that she had left him. The tragedy was that she had never understood who he truly was. She had chased a shadow of success, while the real thing had been sitting right under a banyan tree, waiting for the world to notice. The dust began to settle, revealing a path forward that she had never dared to imagine. She picked up her bag and started walking toward the road, leaving the ruins of her past behind, finally understanding that true strength isn't something you find in someone else, it's something you carve out of yourself, piece by broken piece. The road ahead was long, but for the first time in a decade, the horizon didn't feel like a wall. As Maya walked toward the main highway, the events of the afternoon played over in her mind like a fever dream. She had expected judgment, perhaps even a cruel form of retribution from a man she had once deemed worthless. Instead, he had offered her something far more stinging, complete, cold indifference. His success had been a silent, brutal answer to her betrayal. While she had been wandering through the shadows of the city, trading her dignity for survival, he had been quietly rebuilding himself. He hadn't changed because of her. He had evolved in spite of her. That realization was a bitter pill to swallow, yet it acted as a strange, cleansing fire, burning away the last remnants of her victimhood. A government bus, sent to transport the displaced workers, rumbled to a stop beside her. Maya climbed in, finding a seat near the window. The elder workers were jubilant, talking excitedly about the new opportunities the collector had promised. Maya remained silent, staring at the passing landscape. When they arrived at the district center, the process was efficient and clinical. Urgent, in his role as the architect of this relief effort, was nowhere to be seen. He was already somewhere else, solving someone else's crisis, his life moving at a velocity that made her former struggles seem microscopic. Weeks turned into months. Maya took a job at a local vocational training center, teaching others the discipline she had learned at the kiln, not the back-breaking labor, but the mental fortitude. She was no longer chasing the good life as she had defined it in her youth. She was building a life of substance. One evening, while reading a local newspaper, she saw his face again. There was an article about his appointment to a higher office in the state capital. The photo captured that same sharp, unyielding gaze. Underneath the article, there was a small sidebar about a community project he had initiated, a scholarship fund for the children of brick kiln workers. Maya felt a sudden, inexplicable urge. She wrote a letter. She didn't write to apologize for leaving, nor did she ask for a reunion. She simply wrote, I spent 10 years running from a poverty I thought was you. I realize now the poverty was entirely mine. You fixed the roads, but you also, unknowingly, fixed the person who had lost her way. Thank you. She sent the letter to his office. She never received a reply, and she never expected one. But months later, she heard news that he had returned to the village, not to the kiln, but to the old banyan tree. He had planted a sapling there, a symbol of growth. Maya smiled, finally at peace. She had learned the greatest lesson of her life, that people aren't mirrors for our desires. We are the architects of our own character, and sometimes, the best part of our story begins only after we let go of the past.